On March 11, 2011, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake, one of the 5 most powerful ever recorded, struck the coast of Tohoku, Japan, and, according to Yale.edu, moved Japan almost 8 feet closer to the United States. Travel.state.gov categorized Japan as one of the most seismically active areas in the world and warned that aftershocks following an earthquake of this magnitude were expected to continue for more than a year. Immediately after the earthquake, Japan officials shut down the nuclear power plants in the region. However, Tokyo Electric Power Company's, or TEPCO, Daiichi plant in the Fukushima prefecture, was directly hit from a tsunami before the shutdown could take place. That consequent tsunami hit the coast as far as 6 miles inland, with some waves reaching up more than 130 feet tall and 250 miles long. Due to power outages, meltdowns at the 3 nuclear reactors led to radiation leaks and forced the evacuation of hundreds of thousands of people. According to Cornell University, damages were estimated at more than $34 billion, making it the most expensive natural disaster on the record. Even with fission reactions halted, the nuclear fuel rods have to be kept cool because byproducts of the nuclear reaction continue to break them down and produce heat for years. In order to keep them cool, water must be flowed past them from cooling pumps. This process was difficult to accomplish because there was no electricity due to the earthquake. The diesel generators that should have provided efficient to cool the reactors did not endure the tsunami. The still water reactors began to boil and threatened the meltdown of the uranium inside of them. As of April 12, 2011, the official journal of the World Psychiatric Association, or the WPA, devised that the Fukushima nuclear power plant crisis constituted Level 7 nuclear accident, which is the most severe level reserved by the International Atomic Energy Association for accidents involving significant releases of radioactive material having the potential for extensive environmental contamination and health consequences. Also, studies of radiation events and risk perception show that the specific exposure in Fukushima is so maleficent because it is conflated with nuclear weapons and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. Therefore, the mental health effects will likely be long-lasting. Of all 6 reactors in the plant, units 1, 2, and 3 melted down. According to The Guardian, government advisors had admitted insufficient expertise to work out how high an explosion might blast radioactive material, but warned that an explosion at one reactor or fuel pond could trigger a domino effect as other reactors in the spent fuel ponds became too dangerous to deal with. According to Japan's Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency, or NISA, this led to a series of hydrogen explosions and water leaks within the containment buildings. NISA also indicated that this resulted in a release of radiation, mostly in the form of iodine-131. According to Yale.edu, TEPCO workers vented steam and hydrogen into the building accommodating reactor number 1, and the hydrogen began to build. At ample concentrations, hydrogen is combustible in the presence of oxygen or a spark. The explosion tore the roof off the building containing the reactor. On March 14th, a similar hydrogen ignition affected reactor number 3. The explosion caused its pressure readings to fluctuate, raising fears that its steel containment vessel might be cracked. By nightfall on March 14th, cooling had completely failed at reactor number 2, potentially exposing the entire fuel rods in the reactor to the air and steam. To prevent another hydrogen buildup and explosion, TEPCO workers cut a hole in the side of the building housing Unit 2. Thousands of tons of radioactively contaminated water from the damaged Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant were poured directly into the ocean. Although the enormity of the ocean has the ability to dilute the contamination, signs of spreading radioactive material were found off the coast of Japan. The discovery of elevated concentrations of radioactive cesium and iodine in small fish several dozen miles south of Fukushima and high levels of radioactivity in seawater pose a threat to larger marine life. Radioactive elements such as iodine-131, which has been reported at 5 million times the legal limit of seawater contamination, and cesium-137, which has a half-life of 30 years and has been reported at 1.1 million times its legal level, can be absorbed by phytoplankton, zooplankton, kelp, and other marine life, and then be transmitted up the food chain to larger marine life and humans. Plutonium also poses a threat to marine life. Once in the body, radiation can make its way into the bloodstream, lungs, and bony structures, potentially causing death, cancer, or genetic damage. Radiation victims would look less like this and more like this. According to the New York Times, more than 9 months after the incident, Fukushima still poses a threat to the environment. The Institute for Radiological Protection and Nuclear Safety in France estimates that between March and mid-July, the amount of radioactive cesium-137 that had leaked into the Pacific from the Fukushima Daiichi plant amounted to 27.1% petibecquerels, the greatest amount known to have released from a single episode. The company said that the water had about 1 million times as radioactive strontium as the maximum safe level set by the government. Strontium is readily absorbed by living tissue and can greatly increase the risk of developing cancer. The Japan Atomic Energy Commission released that it could be 10 years before work can begin to remove the melted fuel, and it has been proposed that the 40-year decommissioning timetable set by the government is very optimistic. Ida, a former nuclear engineer who directs the Institute for Sustainable Energy Policies, said that it is not going to be a regular decommissioning process. It's going to take hundreds of years. According to the Los Angeles Times, Japanese officials had already estimated that they had accumulated about 15 million gallons of highly radioactive water. Because the plant's main storage tanks were full, to make room, TEPCO released a couple of million gallons of the least contaminated water into the ocean, with the expectation that its radioactive elements would be diluted in the ocean's mass. However, international law limits their ability to do that. The U.S. and Japanese experts want to reduce the volume of water by concentrating the radioactive elements so they can be solidified into a dry form. Waste experts disagreed on how to implement such concentrations, whether it is through natural evaporation or another method. However, even with the pond to contain waste for evaporation, it could take up to 10 years before the radioactivity would decay enough for the material to be handled. Other experts, however, say exposing the material to open air could allow radioactive substances to blow off the site, adding to the airborne contamination that is already scattering miles from the plant. If the water cannot be concentrated, it can then be put into a dry form or even turned into glass. But this process, called vitrification, is expensive and requires a small-scale industrial facility. As included in the Alaska Dispatch, only 3 of Japan's 54 reactors are in operation 10 months after Fukushima. Initially, Japan had plans to generate most of its electricity through nuclear power by 2030. However, the Prime Minister, Yoshihiko Noda, said the country needs to retain some nuclear plants until the alternative sources of energy are developed. After the nuclear disaster at Chernobyl, the Soviet government chose to evacuate its population long-term rather than decontaminate the city. The Japanese, on the other hand, claimed up more than 1,000 square kilometers of land with the goal to make Fukushima livable again. However, workers and residents face the almost certain possibility that their efforts will create new environmental dilemmas. And according to Yale.edu, the Ministry of Environment estimates that Fukushima will dispose of 15 to 31 million cubic meters of contaminated soil and debris by the time the decontamination projects end. Several centimeters of topsoil will be removed, which will damage wildlife habitat, soil fertility, and increase erosion. One scientist was quoted, "You take away the soil and the ecosystem is destroyed." Nuclear accidents such as the 3 Mile Island accident in Pennsylvania in 1979 and the Chernobyl accident in the Soviet Union in 1986 in the past have shown the world that nuclear power is hazardous. The Journal of Pharmacy and Bioallied Sciences stated that TEPCO has announced that it would be decommissioning the damaged reactors in Fukushima, Japan, after several attempts to revive it failed. According to IAEA.org, on December 16, 2011, the government of Japan announced that all of the reactors had been brought to a condition similar to cold shutdown, and the Nuclear Industrial Safety Agency provided the following comment. The Nuclear Emergency Response Headquarters evaluated that the reactors at Fukushima Daiichi MTS TEPCO were brought to a condition equivalent to cold shutdown, and even if an unforeseeable incident occurs, the exposure dose at the site boundaries can be kept at a sufficiently low level as a result of the evaluation of the securing of safety at nuclear reactor facility of Fukushima Daiichi MTS TEPCO at the completion phase of Step 2. Stating that a safe condition has been achieved and the accident at the MPS itself has come to be settled.